Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third installment of the graduate school application/admission series. The first panel that we had just a few weeks ago was about preparing for graduate school. The second one, which we had last week, was about applying to graduate school. And tonight's session is going to be focused on writing a personal statement. So I want to first start by welcoming our panel members and welcoming you. We're really glad that you decided to join us this evening, and hopefully you'll take away some really good information and some tips about what makes a successful personal statement, because it's really important to your graduate school application. So our first panel member is Dr. Mariette Bates. Dr. Bates is a distinguished lecturer and academic director of the Disability Studies program. Dr. Edwin Knox. Dr. Knox is Associate Director and Academic Director of the Business Program. Dr. Sarah Zeller-Berkman is the Academic Director of the Youth Studies Program. Dr. Margaret Riley is Professor and Academic Director of the Nursing Program. Ellen Carl. Professor Carl is a Distinguished Lecturer and Academic Director for the Health Information Management Program. Dr. Isabel Alicia is the Associate Director for the Psychology Program. Dr. Melanie Lorek is Assistant Professor and Associate Academic Director of Sociology and Human Relations. And I am Dr. Carla Marquez, and I am the Academic Director for the Psychology Program. So I want to first start with something that's related to the personal statement, which is a writing sample. So we're going to talk a little bit about a writing sample before we start talking about the personal statement. So why don't we start with what is a writing sample and why is it requested or required? And we'll start with Dr. Riley, and she can talk a little bit about the importance of a writing sample.
Thank you, Dr. Marquez Lewis. I welcome the opportunity to be here and to talk with the students about a very important part of their academic progression, which is applying to graduate school and all the components associated with that. As you point out, a writing sample is often different from a personal statement, and every graduate program may be a little bit different. Some schools require one, some schools do not. So it's important to carefully read through the application and determine what exactly are the items being requested. Almost all will require a personal statement, and some will require an additional writing sample. And so the purpose of a writing sample is to showcase your ability to think critically and to articulate your ideas in writing. And many schools use this as a metric to determine the capability of a particular applicant to perform well in a graduate program. Most graduate programs do require a lot of reading, analysis, synthesis, and then translating that into writing assignments, articles, etc. So having good writing skills is an important aspect of being successful in a graduate program. Some people during the application process choose to submit a paper they may have written in college. They may retouch it for content and style, depending on whether the program is asking for a specific type of paper in terms of addressing a topic. But if you don't have one that you can dust off, think about the topic and do prepare to write something that will be meaningful and will also be able to communicate your ideas. Some schools ask for a length of someplace between 5 and 20 pages, so you need to be prepared for that. You want to demonstrate that you have an ability to analyze a topic and also that it's a topic related to the field to which you're applying. So some key things in terms of a writing sample is looking at making sure you have content that's relatable, that your style of writing is smooth and incorporates scholarly writing references and citations, and the structure. So things to keep in mind: what is the length that's required? Look at your topic choice. You want to, again, relate it to a particular field. Nobody wants to read a boring paper, even admissions committee people. So try to stand out in the crowd, try to make yourself unique in terms of the topic that you choose. You want to reflect your ability to critically think, and you want to make sure that you cite your sources correctly, because that really is a red flag for many admissions committee that you're not familiar with scholarly writing. So those are just some key things that we wanted to share with you in terms of a writing sample. There's lots of web resources that you can also look at to help you, to guide you. And if you have any questions, you can often have a resource at the admissions department of the school as to get further direction about what is needed and what is required for this writing sample.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Laura, could you talk a little bit about what should be used for a writing sample and really also what should not be used?
Right. So as Dr. Riley was pointing out, it should somehow relate to the program you're applying to in some way. And I think there are different ways this can happen. It can be a term paper that you've written, but it can also be, let's say, if you are active in your community and you have written something for an organization that you work for, that you volunteer for. I think that can be, if you're applying for a program that has a heavy focus on community work, that can be useful. If you, for instance, are part of a student newspaper and you've written a good article, I think those things, if it fits into the program you're applying for, and if there's some evidence of you having written something that's evidence-based, that makes an argument, you can use that too. I would strongly advise against writing a paper for the purpose of submitting it, especially if it's last minute, right? If you leave enough time, I think that's a strategy that's useful. I think if you're not sure what to use, go back to your papers that you've written, take a paper that you're proud of, and try to polish it up. And that's okay to go back to the paper and revise it and make it better. And I even think it's okay to, contact the professor you wrote it with and ask, do you think that would be a good example for a paper that can serve as a writing sample? So as Dr. Riley pointed out, what the admissions committee is looking for is, can you make an argument? Can you make an argument that's evidence-based? Do you have potential for a graduate degree and for the writing that's needed? Are you able to engage with scholarly literature and with the research others have done in a meaningful way? And are you able to produce something that's somewhat polished? So your professor is asking you to sort of go back and revising as, sort of, there's a point to it, meaning, that the idea is that only revision makes a good paper. Anybody who's, publishing knows, like, I don't know how many, 10, 20 revisions per paper at least before it can see the public, right? Maybe you don't have to put in 10 or 20 revisions, but there needs to be a second set of eyes, right? You may want to ask, another student. You may want to ask somebody in your family to look at the paper before you send it out, right? Just make sure it's polished, it looks good, and it's work you're proud of.
Great, thank you. So if your program requests a writing sample, it will say that in the application materials section, but some programs will, some programs won't ask you to do this. But one thing that we know is that you can pretty much count on the fact that they are going to ask you for a personal statement. Whether or not they ask for a writing sample is a different story. So we want to focus on the personal statement a little bit here to give you an idea of what the purpose is, why we write them, what should be included, give you some tips, etc. So why don't we start out with Dr. Knox? Maybe you can frame for the students what the intent is, the format, and the style of writing for personal statements.
Okay, the personal statement is exactly what it says. It's personal. It's about you. It's a little different than your writing sample because the writing sample doesn't necessarily have to be about you, and it's more of a research. In most cases, more research based. Your personal statement, in terms of structure, is more of an essay about who you are. Tell us a little bit about your background, that as it relates to the field of study that you are looking at. It should start with a reason why you are applying to a program, why you believe that you're suitable for that program, provide evidence of your suitability, and that such as listing skills, work experiences, activities, and then also some of your ambition. How does this tie into what you're trying to accomplish in your life? That's very, very important. It gives the program an opportunity to see who you are and how you connect to the program. So when you're writing, it should be clearly about you and how it relates to the program. If you read it and there's something that doesn't seem, you don't have evidence to attach it to the program, it probably shouldn't be included in a basic structure of an essay. Is certainly your introduction, your body, and then your conclusion. I normally like to tell students when they're writing their personal statement, it is like meeting someone you want to date. You tell them all the things that you would like them to know about you, but at the same time, you also tell them what you know about them and how they are connected. So the difference between that writing statement and that personal statement is the personal statement really is truly about you and how you connect with the program. Structure, essay style structure, opening, body, closure.
Great, thank you. So writing a personal statement can be a little bit intimidating because writing about oneself, what do you write? So Dr. Bates, can you talk a little bit about, how do people even start this process and what are the steps they should take to prepare before they start writing?
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing they should do is clearly read the instructions in the application materials, because, we may ask for a personal statement, or the application materials may ask for a personal statement of 1,000 words or 1,500 words. So, and it's difficult to accomplish everything that Dr. Knox just suggested that we put in this statement in the amount of words that you're given. I think that most of us would like you to adhere to the number of words that we, that are in the application material. So if the application material says, advises you that they would like an essay of 1,500 words or 1,000 words, it's good to try to fit what you want to say into that space, because it's not that we wouldn't, if you go over a few words, it's not that we're going to necessarily reject your application. But if it tells us something about your ability to follow instructions, for one thing. So if the personal statement instructions say to give us an essay about you, that's 1,500 words, and we get something that's 25 pages, that could be a red flag for the admissions committee. It might be very interesting, but what it tells us is that you didn't really read the application materials, and you're not able to follow the instructions. The other thing that I would suggest you do is to make an outline, because it really helps to, in telling us so much in such a short period of time, this writing has to be pretty tight. So what are the most important things that you want to tell the program and the admissions committee about yourself? You want to paint a picture of yourself and your life. And as Dr. Knox said, it's important to think about where you want to be when you graduate from this program and be able to tell us that. Well, that means that you need to do that in a few paragraphs, and those paragraphs have to be pretty tight and well organized. So I would suggest that you make an outline and do a draft, reread it, take out things that are extraneous, because although we want to know about you, there are certain things that we don't need to know about you. So make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. This isn't a personal confessional. This is a statement that tells us your experience, your knowledge of how your experience relates to the program, to some extent, what you can bring to the program and what you expect to learn, what you're going to gain from the program, and where that's going to take you into the future. So I think you need to put some thought into what it is you're writing, because this has to be a pretty concise view of yourself. And it also needs to be personal, not overly academic, but it also needs to be literate. So it's really important to write a number of drafts and really get it the way that you would like it before you submit it. Check it for grammar and spelling, because remember, this is your, if the program does not ask for a writing sample, this is what the admissions committee has to be able to ascertain whether you're a good fit for the program. And the other documents you're giving us are supporting information, your resume and your letters of recommendation. So it needs to be well written, well organized, with good grammar and spelling. And again, it's good to have somebody else read it if you can, to give you feedback. But I think the most important thing is to write an outline and be sure that you read the instructions that are given in the application materials.
You know, one of the things you were talking about, Dr. Bates, you mentioned fit, and we had talked about fit. It came up in both of the weeks that we were, both of the panels. So Dr. Zeller-Brookman, can you talk a little bit about the role that fit plays and about goals, which Dr. Bates was also talking about? How do students work those into the personal statement, or how should they use them?
I mean, you know, discussing your goals is really key in a personal statement. One, because the program needs to know if it can actually get you to your next steps, to where you want to be. So for example, in the youth studies program, if I saw that someone said that they wanted to be to have like an individual clinical practice with young people, because they're really committed to young people, I would say that's amazing, but actually I would refer them to like a licensed clinical social work program or a clinical psych program or something like that. But two, you know, we want to get a sense of your goals because we want to feel inspired. We want to bring people that will be leaders in this field or maintain a strong commitment to whichever field they're entering. So this is, you know, the place to really make a case that you know what you want to do, and that this is the program to get you there, and that you've done enough research about our program to be able to, as Dr. Knox was saying, provide some evidence about why it's a good fit to get you to where you want to be. You know, of course, it may change what you want to do as you go through the program, but we want to make sure through your personal statement that there's real alignment there on the front end. And graduate school takes so much time and energy that we don't want you to invest in that way if there's not a good fit, and it also, you know, might make the program nervous that you wouldn't follow through if it doesn't seem right. I think, you know, many people talked about fit. You know, it's come up a ton for us, and this is really the place to, once again, as Dr. Knox said and many others, say who you are, but who you want to be, and how the program can help get you there. Yeah, I think that's it.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that came up earlier, so, you know, those are ways that you can work your goals and who you want to be. But Dr. Bates said earlier, we don't need to know everything there is to know about you. So Professor Carl, can you talk a little bit about how a student can use their personal history or their personal story in the personal statement, and then maybe also what they should avoid, how they can avoid being, crossing boundaries or being maybe inappropriate?
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Marquez Lewis. I love what Dr. Knox said about think about that you're dating someone and you put exactly in your personal statement what you would like this new person in your life to know. You don't have to really don't put too much information in it. Just put enough in there so that people can get to know you. Oftentimes I have students in my program who have a personal statement or a personal experience that relates well to the field of health information management. If you have one of those, I would say definitely put that in your statement, because that demonstrates your knowledge of the program. It demonstrates perhaps your goals of where you want to go because you had this experience in the field, and you then can communicate with enthusiasm and what your feeling is about the field that you're applying for. So I would say just be very cautious about what you're putting in there. You don't want to spend too much time. You don't want your whole personal statement to have a personal story in it, because as others have mentioned already, there are many other things that you're going to need to try and squish into that personal statement. And as Dr. Bates said, you have to put enough in there. You want to talk about your goals. You want to talk about the program. You want to talk about your strengths, maybe some of your work experience, your previous education. So there's a lot of things to pack into this particular personal statement. So I would certainly limit most of your personal experiences or personal story in there, unless it really relates to the degree. I guess that's mainly my my take on it, and I love what Dr. Knox said. I'm going to use that from now on. I'm going to make sure that if anybody asks me, we talk about dating and how it can relate to your personal statement.
I'm the director of the Disability Studies program. So in the personal statements from my program, if someone has a disability or they have a child with a disability, that's probably relevant to the program. And I would want to know that because it gives an extra dimension to why someone might want to study in my program of disability studies. But as Dr. Carl said, or Ellen Carl said, I don't need to know every single experience from when you were a child related to your disability. What I want to know is how that relates to your program of study. And if you don't have experience, or you don't have a family member with a disability, or you don't have a disability yourself, then I'd like to know that. And I'd like to know why you want to engage in this program of study. So that's how I would relate the personal stories to the program in my program.
Great, thank you. So this leads us to, some of the things we've touched on, but Dr. Alicia, can you talk a little bit about, besides goals and fit and personal history and some of the other things that people have touched on, what other things should be included or covered in the personal statement? What's helpful for people to know?
So again, to echo what everyone else is saying, a personal statement is an opportunity for you to really introduce yourself and for you to allow the program to understand what you bring to the table, as well as for you to tell them what you're expecting to get from being there. My suggestion is that you do a lot of research when you're getting ready to write your personal statement. Don't just read the instructions for the personal statement in detail, but also take a look at the web page of the department you're thinking of applying to. Look to see what connections there are between the work that's being done in that department and what you're interested in. Take a look at the courses you might be expected to take. I find it to be a really great touch when students sometimes indicate that they're really excited to take a particular course in the program, or that they see a connection between a course that we offer and something that they are aiming to do. I also think it's very important if you're applying to a PhD program to indicate who you'd like to work with, and not just one person, have the names of a few people, or at least indicate that you have an interest in their work. Those are things that indicate not only that you've done your homework, but also that you might potentially fit the program in a way that is a little different from what's been said so far about fit, where it's not just that you fit the program in general, but you fit an individual professor's or several individual professors' actual work agendas because you have similar interests and maybe even similar ambitions to the ones that their students already have. Other things to consider, I have a slightly different take on personal information than some. And that's partially because as a psychologist, I often read personal statements that reveal a lot of very, very personal information, where sometimes students reveal a diagnosis of a psychological disorder in the personal statement. And particularly in developmental psychology, you will get a lot of comments about people's history with being parents or with childbearing. And that can be, that type of information can be welcome and very for the program, but there is such thing as too much information. There is such a thing. And so, for example, if you have a diagnosis of psychological disorder, you might not want to include that in your personal statement, simply because that type of information is confidential and we're not entitled to know that information. So you don't have to disclose it. That's something to keep in mind. If you have a child and you want to be a better parent, I love hearing that. I'm a developmental psychologist. I think we should all want to be better to the young people in our worlds, whether we're parents or not. But keep in mind that that's not the only thing. You have to find ways to connect that to something else. So is it that you're interested in parenting, not just from a personal level, but in terms of helping other parents? Is it that you see a connection between something you discovered as a parent to issues in the larger world that'll make the world a better place? Keep in mind that it's not just about your personal goals, but it's also about worldview and a larger mission for maybe the world around us. We love to hear that you want to improve yourself, but we also like to hear sometimes that you'd like to make a difference in the world.
Great. Anyone else want to add anything to that? So I want to sort of pose a broad question. All of you have had experience sitting on admissions committees, and so we're going to tap into your wisdom. So this is just an open question to all of you, all of our panel members. What are some of the do's and don'ts of writing an effective personal statement, and what have you seen over the years you've been doing this that has been either particularly effective or particularly problematic?
So I'd like to jump in and respond to that, Dr. Carla Marquez Lewis. This is Marge Riley. I oversee the nursing program. But I think this suggestion is important, not just for nursing applications, but also for programs in general. And I think it's really important to emphasize that you really do need to spell check your essay, as well as grammar check. There's something disconcerting about reading a personal statement that has a lot of misspelled words, out of sequence, run-on sentences. That's off-putting often to the admissions committee. So do take the time. There's lots of tools that you can use. Simply writing your statement out on a Word document. You have the opportunity to spell check and grammar check there. It's also a good idea to have someone review it for you and make suggestions for how to be more effective. But that's a real red flag for a lot of admissions committee. If you didn't take the time to be careful enough to spell correctly, that would be something that the admissions committee would hold in a certain regard. So you want to make sure that you're clear, spell right, do your grammar checks. The other suggestion I would make in regard to this is be sure when you're writing, if you are speaking about the particular school or program, that it is the correct school or program that you write about. I have received personal statements from students and they say, I'm applying to the X program at X school and I don't have that program and I am not from that school. So that's off-putting as well. And again, it speaks to, being a lack of being careful enough to ensure that what you're submitting is the appropriate and correct thing to the school and the program to which you are applying.
I'll jump in. One of the things when you're writing, try to find the more compelling and interesting thing. When you go back and you're preparing to write all the stories out that sort of says, this is how I connect to this program, and then figure out how you can tell one of those stories in an interesting way. We do a lot of reading, and normally it's the personal statements that we tend to focus on. The ones that capture us is telling us something that is really, really meaningful, but it's also told in a very compelling way. It sort of kind of squeezes or tugs at the heart. I would tell you to look at that. So you may have 10 stories, you can't tell us all 10, but really look at those of those and pick one that would be really interesting to tell, because there's many ways to tell a story and there's many situations that sort of fit. You just have to pick that one and put a lot of thought into it and make sure that you have the right program, that you have the exact program name. That normally is off-putting to me, that I'll read and someone has, they don't really know the name of the program.
Any others want to share any great things that you've seen or things that maybe were not so good? I mean, I can tell you one of the things that happens a lot that I see in the psychology program is a lot of cliches. The one I get the most is I've always wanted to help people, or people have always come to me for advice. And I don't want to sort of, make light of that really is a draw to fields like psychology, that people have a desire to help. But those are things we see all the time. I mean, for me, it's almost every personal statement. So try, as people have been saying, be different, right? I sort of expect that's part of why you're coming. Tell me something else. So avoid those kind of cliches.
Yeah, I think also, we have some students who've been out of school for quite a long time and are coming back after they've been out for a while. So drawing attention to that might be helpful to the admissions committee. Also, if your GPA is less than 3.0 and there's a particular reason why, it's good to tell us about that, because for one thing, that acknowledges that your GPA is less than our stated requirement. And I think, as we've said in previous sessions, we look at applications holistically. So sometimes the GPA isn't quite 3.0, but if you were somebody who got a bachelor's in a subject that you thought you wanted to study when you were 18 or 20, and then your life took you in a different direction and you didn't do particularly well in your bachelor's program, or if some disaster struck during your bachelor's program, which sometimes happens, where, I've had students indicate in their personal statement that you'll notice in this particular semester, I got all Fs, and that was because my father had an auto accident and I had to take care of them. That's helpful to us. You don't need to go into a great deal of detail, but it helps to just acknowledge and explain why those things might appear on your transcript. That could be 2 sentences. It doesn't have to be, 3 paragraphs, but it does help the admissions committee to get a fuller picture of you as a student. And so that helps us when you indicate those things in your personal statements.
Dr. Biggs, I just want to extend on that one. I have read where students will tell me about their poor performance, but there may not be any evidence on how they made up for it. They tell you, oh, back then I had this difficulty, and then they don't address how they've sort of filled in for it that got them to this point where they believe they can get through our program. So I'd say certainly tell us where your challenges are, and then you may want to speak to how you've made up for it, such as in your work experience, you've been a manager, you've been working on these type of things that is more reflective that you do understand those things that your transcript might not showcase as well. So do that. It may not be necessary if you read the statement and it's there already, but if it's not there, try to explain how you've made up for it, how you filled in the gap.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
I was just going to mention one other thing, and this is somewhat minor, but I would suggest that you start off your personal statement with really think about your first line of your personal statement, and have it be sort of something that the reader then wants to go on and continue reading your statement. And I would suggest staying away from "hello, my name is," that you can always sign your document at the end, and that would probably be the best thing to do, but I would not make that your leading line in your personal statement.
Great. So we want to take a few of your questions, your general questions. But before I do, I did want to just ask that in anticipation of our breakout groups that are going to happen in just a bit, if you can change your name to indicate the group that you'd like to be moved to when we go into breakout rooms, that would be very helpful. You can do that if you hover over your picture, you'll see the little ellipsis, the 3 dots. You can click on that and it says rename, and you can change your name. So if you go in the chat, you'll notice there's a list of breakout rooms. So if you wanted to go into the psychology room, for example, in my case, I would write Carla-Psych. And we don't want your full name and then the breakout room because it'll cut it off. So just your first name and the abbreviated breakout room would be really helpful. So with that, let me go to some of the questions that have already been posed, and then I'll open it up for our panel. So someone asked a question, a good question, which is there a difference, or would there be a difference between when people ask for a personal statement or when people ask for a statement of purpose? Anyone want to answer that?
I think they're used interchangeably in our youth studies kind of admissions world, but yeah, someone else wanted to.
Yeah, I'll agree. They are interchangeable in many respects. It tells someone what it is that you're trying to accomplish, what's your purpose for doing this. At the same time, it's still very personal because it's about you and what you're trying to accomplish. So they're really somewhat interchangeable. There may be some gradations in some people's minds, but for the most part, they're one and the same.
Great. Someone asked, when should the personal statement be written? It seems that a successful one needs to somehow connect with certain teachers and certain resources. Thus, do you still need to be in school is what they're asking, or when should you write that?
That's for the writing sample?
It sounds like they're asking about the personal statement. When should we write our personal statement? So based on the way it's worded, it sounds like maybe someone's asking whether or not the personal statement should be written while you're still in school, but I don't know if you mean, why don't I put a pin in that one, and I'll let that person explain just a little bit more, because I think I can see the question going 2 different ways. I want to make sure we answer correctly. The next question is, how long should your personal statement be? Dr. Knox, I think you talked a little bit about that, but could you reiterate about how long they usually are? Oh, I think you're muted, Dr. Knox.
Okay, my apologies. The personal statements really shouldn't be more than a page and a half. Most programs will articulate the number of words. Some can be as small as 250, some may go as high as 1,500 words, but generally around a page and a half should be sufficient. But it does require that you take great deliberate care and being very concise, but being very, very thorough. So someone says, when should you write it? Going in that direction, I'm not sure if that's what they're asking. You should write it as soon as you start thinking about going to grad school, because there may be a number of iterations that you will have to go through to make it a really good statement.
I just want to add very quickly, something else to consider is that your personal statement should be tailored. This is about your personal relationship with the program. It's about what you're going to be doing with one program as opposed to another program. And you may be applying to different types of programs. So once you write the statement, which is a great idea that Dr. Knox just mentioned, write it ahead, but then edit it and edit it again, and then edit it again, and once again if necessary, until you have a statement that really fits that specific program. And for each statement, call yourself starting over from your template and going back and tailoring your statement to that program. Don't just have a blanket statement that you send to everyone. Keep in mind that different programs call for different things. So there are differences between, for example, a social justice oriented social psychology program or a basic social psychology program, so to speak. And there are differences between other types of programs depending on the field. You could be going to a social work program that's clinical. There are also social work programs that are more policy oriented. So tailor your statement after you've written the template, basically.
And just to jump on, the idea of tailoring also goes back to what we were saying about, do you include personal things or not? So if you're applying to a program that's social justice oriented, which the epistemology is that knowledge comes from those most impacted by any issue or something like that, then, it would be very appropriate to talk about something from your own life that's drawing you to want to do this work with more broadly. But once again, as my colleagues have mentioned, it's really about how you're providing evidence that your history and your future, what you want to do, all relate to this particular program, and how this is the program that can enable you to do that, and that you're the person that is the good fit for this program.
Great. Somebody asked if your GPA is a little lower than a 3.0, but you received a graduate degree later that was, and your GPA was higher. Should you discuss that in your personal statement, when you've had a challenge in your undergraduate, or should you just really focus on your graduate school experience and those accomplishments?
I think this goes back to what Dr. Knox said about, you can contextualize anything that is a part of your application that may not meet standards, but also say why you're now ready for graduate school. And this would be a clear piece of evidence that you can do graduate school, you've done graduate level work, so this would fit in really well there. So I would mention both. Do other people think differently?
No, I certainly agree with that. I think that, again, this doesn't have to be several paragraphs, but you could say, as you'll notice from my transcript, in my bachelor's program, I didn't do well, but let me draw your attention to the graduate work that I did and the fact that I have now received another master's degree. And I feel that has prepared me to engage and study in your program. That's a fairly concise way of just saying, that you're aware of this, and you're, and that you have, you now are ready to do graduate work, as Dr. Knox, made reference to.
I would agree with that as well. I think that it's important to indicate that you have demonstrated growth in your academic development, especially if, say, you earned that bachelor's degree many, many years ago, perhaps when you were very young and had other distractions in your life. And then you demonstrated when you were older that you were able to tackle academic work and do well and be successful. So I think it would be important to show that growth and development and readiness to take on a new challenge.
Someone asked a question, if our parents influenced our career choice, should we include that in the personal statement, and how much time should we dedicate to that kind of information?
I mean, I can respond to that. I think it's fine to mention it, but I wouldn't elaborate on it. Mention it because it is your personal, statement, right? But keep in mind that the personal statement is trying to do a whole lot of different things, right? It's introducing who you are. It's helping committee members to assess you as a writer, right? It's trying to convince the committee, so you're trying to convince the committee that you fit well into their program, right? So every sentence that you write should really get the point across. That's how tailored it needs to be. There shouldn't be extra sentences that don't get the point across that you want to get across. So I wouldn't elaborate on it other than just mentioning it.
I think that, for example, in my program, if your parents had, both were deaf and you grew up using sign language, it's a relevant thing. Or if your parents had a small business and you grew up in a business and that's why you became interested in business, it might be relevant for Dr. Knox's program. But, as Dr. Lorek said, think about each word as, as being really precious. So how do you want to spend, if you have 1,500 words to write, each word is really important. So do you want to spend your 1,500 words, by saying that? It might be really relevant and it might absolutely be something that's important. But if you step back in the context of your life, is it the most important thing that the committee needs to know? So I would look at it that way.
Others? Any others? Oh, sorry, I thought someone was leaning forward to talk. So another question that was asked is, what is a good way to start? Literally the first line. So if my name is not a good way, have you ever seen very interesting ways that people have kind of drawn you in? While people are thinking, I can tell you one that really stands out in my mind. I had someone was talking to me about an event that happened that really was a life-changing sort of event. It was an accident that had happened to them, and it really changed the trajectory of their life. And they started by placing me sort of right at the moment of that accident. It was, I woke up, in a hospital wondering where I was. I mean, it made me say, huh, what's happening here? And then, it sort of went on. So sort of reminded me of a movie where you start the movie sort of right in the middle, and then it sort of unravels. It was a very compelling way to tell a story. And it did draw me in, and it was very effective. Have others seen anything that's sort of been interesting for them or that was effective? I don't want anyone to think you have to do that. You don't have to be a screenwriter for these. I've also seen regular letters that are just as interesting and just as effective without doing that.
So I often am drawn in by students who talk about the reason they were drawn to the nursing profession. And very often it talks about a pivotal experience in their life, perhaps involving a family member or a friend who was ill, and how it affected the family and how the care of that person impacted their perspective and their eventual decision on a career. So oftentimes introducing that experience is a way that grabs attention. And once someone like myself or members of the admission committee want to continue to read on and find out what happened, what was the outcome of this, and then what was the journey that this person ended up on, that they chose this particular career, and how did they get there?
Great, thank you. Any others want to mention anything?
I don't, but I think I love that question. Thank you. And if we do this again in another year, I think we can all come to the table with kind of, starters that moved us or things like that. So thank you so much for asking that question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the last question, and then we'll go into the breakout rooms. Does CUNY have a writing workshop or other resources to help applicants in writing their personal statement? So that's really what this is meant to be. When it was originally conceived in the spring of 2020, the idea was that we would be in person by November. Now it seems like a dream and a fantasy to have thought that, but so we would have moved into physical breakout rooms and workshopped these ideas. So we're doing something a little bit different because we are based with Zoom. But if we happen to go back into a space where we are going to be live, we would like to do more hands-on workshops. So it is in the works. But right now we're sort of doing the best with the hand we've been dealt with this health pandemic. So I do want to just kind of leave you with a little list before we go into the breakout rooms of some of the things that we've talked about tonight, just some sort of key things that people have mentioned, so you can kind of see them in list form. Remember that people mentioned read the instructions. Make sure to answer the question or the questions that have been posed to you. Sometimes there are very specific things people want you to answer. Tailor the statement, do your homework, as people have mentioned. Address the fit between you, the program, and the school. Make sure to highlight your strengths, your research experience, your work experience. Address any deficits in your record, as Dr. Bates mentioned. All in all, be authentic. So when Dr. Knox was talking about the dating sort of example, you don't go into a date and completely lie about yourself, right? You put your best foot forward, but you tell the truth. So be yourself, be authentic, keep things relevant. Use specific examples. Don't be just vague. Make sure that you have concrete examples to provide. Avoid cliches, maintain appropriate boundaries, make sure to check for accuracy. And then of course, revise, and revise. So with that, we're going to go ahead and send you into the breakout rooms now, and you'll be working with the leader for each of your breakout groups. We're going to show you some examples of personal statements and why they work, why they don't work. And then we'll do a little bit of other work with you. So, and also answer discipline-specific questions. So with that, I do want to say just thank you again for all of you who have participated, not just tonight, but throughout the entire panel series. And we plan to continue these hopefully each fall. And I hope to see you in the future. And, we all hope to receive some of your statements with your applications to the many graduate programs that we have at CUNY SPS. So thank you and have a great night.